Pnawn da, good afternoon.
Hello, Shmai.
Can you start by giving me your full name and where we are here today?
I am Holly Cross and we're in Canolfan Llwynhirion in Brynberian.
Great. Can you start off then by telling me how long you've lived in this area for and what your first memories of the place are, if you can remember?
I've lived here for, I think it'll be 14 years this autumn. And my first memories will be a bit before that because my parents have lived here for 22 years, I think. So I would have been a visitor before I was a resident. And my first memories of the Preselis are, and I think now I can identify it as, I think it's, I can't remember the name of it, it's part of what we call like the Dragon's Back. Some people call the Dragon's Back on the Preselis. And coming up a steep slope and popping out on the ridge with all these craggy rocks with my parents and their dog. And yeah, just being like, wow, this is a special and exciting landscape.
So what struck you as different from where maybe you'd spent most of your time growing up before?
So I grew up in Somerset, kind of so really just across the water. I mean, you can almost see it from parts of South Wales anyway, not from here. But so there's an upland sort of feel to that area. I live near the Quantock Hills, but they're much more a gentler sort of hill region. It's similar kind of bare tops and similar by the coast, more sort of estuarine coast. So I suppose there was a familiarity there. So my sense of like, I like being in wooded valleys. I like being on open tops. I like upland sort of landscapes. But what's different and special about here is that, like that craggy extra, it's not a hardness. It's just a wildness. I think that's what it is. That additional wildness of the rocks that protrude from the hills up on the Preselis, and then the coast, I think, because it's coastal as in proper sea, as opposed to that estuarine kind of coast that I grew up on, it's so much more glistening. So that view that you get of the glistening blue coast and a proximity of wonderful beaches, that's, I think, what makes it as a landscape special. And then I think quite soon when I arrived here to live, the communities of this area are what makes it exceptional for me. My experience, I suppose, it's the place I've lived longest as an adult, so maybe I can't compare, but it feels very warm and welcoming and supportive and quite vibrant and determined. It's all those really exciting things that really definitely keep me here now.
So that's really why you've stayed here?
Yeah, the natural beauty of it, definitely. Just last night, on solstice night, watching the sun go down and having a swim in the sea and going, I actually live here, like how lucky. But also, I make my life here, I work here, and I work in community development. So, and that for me started as a volunteer, so it's come from being welcomed and supported to find my way into what I'm interested in. And then it's turned into a job, and
So what do you do? Give us an idea of what you do, Holly.
I help run a community benefit society, CUPHAT Renewable Energy, which started as a interest group of volunteers looking at community scale renewables, so ownership of renewable assets, so that we can make an income for the community to spend on what the community needs, as opposed to exporting all of that energy and exporting all of that financial benefit. But we've grown into a much more diverse organisation now, doing all sorts of things around sustainability and community connection, kind of connecting people with the nature on their doorstep, with each other, with skills that are associated with maybe being able to survive in a rural place. Yeah, so it's provided me with a career and with all these amazing contacts and friends, and yeah.
Great. So can you tell me a little bit about what sort of area is this in terms of its social life, in terms of the activities that go on here regularly? And do you partake in them?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, definitely. All of my life is in a very small geographical area, really. So I sing in a choir, and this is the second choir I've been in. In fact, I think it must have been in the first week that I landed and was like, yeah, I'm going to live here. I went to choir with Bill Trevor and my mum, and that was Mollera's choir over on the other side of the Preselis, and ended up with a huge social group because of that choir. And now I'm in another choir which is even bigger, which is another group of people and even more diverse. So yeah, singing is a big thing for me, and doing the singing, and I suppose maybe also when I think about it, going to Tumpath, I really love a good Tumpath. Maybe that's not quite in the Preseli region, but I know they're around. And then I suppose I make my own social fun with groups of friends, and going out and about into nature is a major part of that. So going walking on the Preselis, or going to the beach and swimming, and eating together on the beach. So
where do you normally go to walk on the Preseli? Where are your favourite places to walk if you've got?
The first place that comes to mind is Voidra Garden above Crymych. That's the most accessible edge of the Preselis to where I live. And it's like funny enough, I haven't been there for a while. I realised that this morning. And I associate that place with a time when I was struggling a bit with various things in life. And I would go there to be out of breath and cry a bit, and then have an amazing view.
It's quite a pull up, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a steep one.
But you can see quite far from there.
You can see along the ridge really, and to the sea, and then back to the sort of more gentle hills towards Carmarthenshire. And it's a short enough walk for it to just be an hour, and then come back down feeling better. So that was always my kind of go-to place. And I mean, I really love walking the whole ridge. I love that walk where you can park at one end and park at the other end, and walk the whole lot and go for a pint at Tafarn-Zinc, and
think a day of it.
Yeah, indeed. And actually, this summer more and more, I've been to the quarry in Rosebush to swim, because I like a bit of wild swimming. So in this really hot weather, because my parents now live in Brymberian, it's a bit closer. I either go to the sea, or actually where I'm likely to not bump into as many people in the quarry, although that's changing now.
So are there lots of people that go and wild swim there and locally? Has that become popular?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, there's local groups, I think. I'm not a part of any kind of swimming group, but there's the Blue Tits and I don't know what the men's version is. It's probably also slightly filthy. And I have friends who have been part of those kind of swimming groups. And I mean, my dad's been well into his wild swimming, so it's always been part of what we've done wherever we've been. But I mean, going to Rosebush Quarry, you meet people who are there for the swimming, and because it's a special, strange, magical place.
It is interesting, isn't it? Because even though it's almost man-made, it feels very wild, isn't it?
It's being taken back in a way, isn't it? But it's also, if you swim in it, it's like it feels bottomless, which is quite exciting.
Is it very cold?
You know what? It was warmer the other day than it was in the sea, and I swam last night in the sea here. It felt quite icy compared to maybe the rocks have warmed it up or something this year. I don't know.
So do you go swimming in the winter as well as the summer?
It has been known, but I think I did go swimming in January this year, and I almost regretted it. Because it was very cold.
I can imagine.
But I mean, I refer to my dad, who is pretty determined, going like as often as he can. He tries to go once a week throughout the year. It does drop off a bit in the winter, and I can do it, but it takes some self-talk, some encouragement. Yeah.
But afterwards, do you feel the benefit?
Yeah, I really do. Once the pain goes away and you can remember you've got feet again, yeah, definitely. And just a swim last night was gorgeous. It was cold, but it was like, I feel all of the worries of the day have gone. And you're directly in nature. You're like literally submerged in it.
Yeah, it's not like going in the bath, is it?
No, it's a bit more expansive than that.
Yeah, great. So any other places that you like to visit, perhaps local stones or archaeological sites of significance?
I'm not so much a follower of that. Funnily enough, we were going to go and watch the sunset from Pentrefan, the burial chamber up here, last night, but there was so many people parked there, including the police, interestingly, that we decided not to. We thought we wouldn't get involved in that ruckus. Whereas last year, on the same day of the year, there was nobody else there. It's really interesting change in a year. So actually we went up to the Cairns, maybe on Owen up there, which actually is probably one of my favourite. I mean, I know that's not an archaeological site, but that kind of rocky, very accessible, beautiful rise up and the sea opening up in front of you. And I do often go to Tyrcannel Woods, but again, you asked about archaeological sites, and it's not so much what I seek. Much more interested in just what's occurring. Although I mean, I do like a good ruin.
Do you?
So I wonder if that's part of the fascination in Rosebush Quarry is, like you said,
nature takes it back.
Yeah, there's something kind of exciting about that quite near history, which you can see with the walls and some of them, whatever, the roofs are still just about there. Yeah, I do quite enjoy that. Yeah,
there's more evidence of that human connection there. Perhaps.
Maybe that's what excites me. It always has, even as a kid. I remember that in all these remote Spanish villages, sort of almost like they've just been left. I find that quite interesting.
So there are many ruins around the Preselis. Do you know of?
I think I'll often notice things like an old sheepfold, those sorts of things, and I'm trying to think if I can think of any.
So maybe certain things that other people would overlook in a landscape, perhaps.
There's a couple of old cottages. I mean, I can't think where exactly they are now that I've kind of gone, let's have a look and see. And in fact, Havod, I think it's called Havod, on the moor up from
Havod Tidfield.
Yeah, that's it. I love that place. That's amazing. I've never climbed over the fence and looked, I promise. Because that's a real feel of a little farmstead with the sheepfolds. And I do love that. That's a great walk from the door where my parents live as well, and you can go right up to the ridge from there.
And it's quite remote up there, isn't it?
Yeah, and you can see it a mile off because it's this little green oasis amongst
it's
the
like
sort of moor.
bit, isn't it? Yeah.
And I do like the sort of, you can just see a bit of evidence of old fields from, is it Carnmenin? I can't remember. I'm really bad at remembering the names of the Carns.
Yes.
Some of the really old original fields. And I suppose even Foldrigarn is itself an old fortress. You can kind of see the evidence of the banks.
You were saying that you enjoyed going there. That is a prime archaeological site.
Yeah, good point. I suppose for me that's a secondary reason to go. But now you ask, I can see that does interest me. Yeah.
I think there's lots of the imprints of the huts.
That's it. Yeah, and there's the bank, isn't there? And you kind of you can imagine where the gateway might have been. And
Cool. So thinking about the local area, do you know about many myths or legends?
I was just talking to someone today about the Rebecca riots, and I know this isn't a myth, this is historical, this actually happened, but it becomes legendary, doesn't it? For sure. But it's interesting, I think it's partly because I haven't grown up around here, I haven't absorbed those things like you might if you went to school here and had that as part of the story of your upbringing. But I've kind of become aware of, and I mean even I think of iconic people like Wilder, the poet, again, the sort of a legendary figure, standing up for the rights of other people. Often that's something that, like I said, when I noticed the community here being really sort of fiercely independent and supportive, and social justice seems to be a really important part of those two examples of legends that I've heard about. And again, I don't think that's just me being attracted to that. I think that genuinely is what, there's that sense of no, we need to look after ourselves and each other.
And I suppose the brooding of Preselis as well.
Yes,
in the same vein.
Exactly what I, funny enough, mentioned in the same context of Tumcan Arbeth with this person I was chatting to today. Yeah, that's an amazing story of people rising up and standing up against a huge power of the Ministry of Defence and ordinary people.
So it's grassroots.
Yeah, absolutely. And an incredible difference to not just the landscape but the lives of the communities that lived here would have been made because of those people standing up, whether that be to prevent tolls being too high or to prevent land being taken by the Ministry of Defence. Amazing stories.
So do you think that's a strong part of the identity of the area for people like yourself that maybe you've moved here later in your life, you haven't grown up here? Is it very sort of a strong identity that does it come across?
Yes, I think it does. And maybe I learned about those stories later, but I would have felt the impact of them or the influence of them in people without knowing that these were part of the history of these communities, for sure. Yeah, just the way I got involved in how I really got involved apart from the choir was by volunteering for the Celtic Blue Rock Festival, which was a fun, big, massive, amazing community fundraising activity to try and...
explain a little bit about that.
Yeah.
It's an interesting history.
So there's and you know more, a hell of a lot more about this than I do, Sophie. the county council were proposing to close the school in Hermon, the primary school in Hermon, Welsh language, small village school, and the community did not want that to happen, and they had very good reasons for it not to happen, as in you can't justify this. The numbers are not dropping off. This is a living school. So the amazing group of people went through this process of trying to prevent that from happening. Unfortunately, they failed in that, but the council, even when the school was closed, the community said, okay, well, still we're going to have this. This is our place. This is our thing. So they went through the process of buying the school. And now it's an amazing community centre in the very vibrant, close-knit village of Hermon. So the Celtic Blue Rock Festival was a sort of fundraiser and celebration of that whole... I can't remember exactly where it came in, whether it was raising funds to buy the school or before the school was closed for the legal battle, because it went through to the Crown Court, I think, in the end, didn't it?
It did, yeah.
So yeah, I got involved. I was like, I like volunteering at festivals, I'll be a part of that, and ended up going, this is what's behind this festival. That's incredible.
I think it was a secret passion of Bill's as well.
He just wanted to have a big party on his field, didn't he? But it's fair enough.
Yeah.
And to celebrate, the amazing people that live here, and people like Molara, who I sing with. She had a huge involvement in that. She's a professional musician who's moved into this area, and lots of people. I've got long old connections with people who really wanted to celebrate and bring people together to dance and to sing, and the kids were singing on the stage, and
it was a real community event, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
But it attracted people from quite far.
I think it did. Yeah.
Because how many years did it go for in the end? Was it 3?
I think it may have been more than that. I think it sort of sputtered out a little bit. In fact, I came quite towards the end of its time. I think I wasn't there for the original.
I think it was. They had to close it down because it was too big, and the insurance and safety aspects of it. Yeah,
it got too much.
Weren't sustainable anymore.
No, and licensing laws changed at the same time as it expanding to try and fit the demand for a big party, and it made it much harder for a small festival to run, actually. And then, as a group of volunteers, we were like, this is maybe a bit more than we can really do safely. So those were good days. I'm really glad we don't do it anymore because it was full on. But incredible thing to have been a part of.
And great memories, I'm sure.
Absolutely, yeah.
Great. So you have learnt Welsh. What was that experience like?
Funnily enough, the reason I really knuckled down with it was because of Blue Rock Festival and being in a committee meeting of that and going, I'm the only non-Welsh speaker here. These guys are now speaking English because I can't otherwise understand what's going on, which was hugely generous, and that still happens now, where people are exceedingly generous to speak English because they appreciate that that's easier for me. But so I just chose to learn Welsh and really commit to it for reasons of like, God, I can't have that. That's not fair. There needs to be equality here. Plus, like, I'm quite excited by learning another language. This looks like is where I'm going to stay, so let's do that. And I was lucky enough, because I was living on my parents' land at the time, I didn't have huge amounts of outgoings, so I didn't have to work all the time, so I could commit. And I did like 1 day a week in lessons, and then I did, did all my homework.
And you're extremely proficient in it now.
Not bad, I'm not practicing enough, and I need to seek out more opportunities to speak it that aren't just incidental, I think. But yeah, I feel like I'm a fluent in a sort of casual sort of way. I'd struggle to have like a business meeting in Welsh perhaps, but I'm happy having a chat.
How do you feel that has influenced your understanding and maybe appreciation of the area?
I can't explain how much. It's so vastly informative as to, I mean, just something simple, like I remember learning it to the point where I was like, I understand I understand what the place name means now. I can read that poster, because some things are only in Welsh, advertising Welsh language activities, and that suddenly opened up doors to maybe social activities, or just an understanding that they were even on, even if I didn't want to go. And then that appreciation of the meaning of places, and then of course that additional level of acceptance and appreciation within the community, I think has meant that I'm kind of, in a way, I can be a bridge sort of person. I know you understand this even more than I, between someone who's come in and those who have always lived here and speak that language. Although I'm kind of, I don't know, I have my identities all over the place and I don't think about it too much, but I definitely feel like, especially in the work I work in, it's really valuable to be able to speak Welsh and appreciate and
to be able to access those different parts of the community. Yeah,
for sure. I definitely never going to be perceived as a native who is, because I'm not, who has come from round here, but I do enjoy it when people go, oh yeah, God, we can speak Welsh with Holly, and some people always do. There's some people I always speak Welsh with, partly because they're bloody minded and determined to help me, it feels like, and it's great, they're celebrating the fact that I can. And then there are some who won't, interestingly. Bill and Ailys especially, like, I can't speak Welsh to you, it's too weird. And I totally get that, it's
interesting though, isn't it? Certain people, if they've met you in that one language, it's very difficult to switch. I'm the same with certain people. It's interesting.
And I suppose, just touching on identity, because I'm not as articulate in Welsh as being my second language as I am in English, I think that's still a big hurdle for me, because I feel like I'm a slightly different person through Welsh than I am through English. But again, I know that would come with practice. But like I miss subtleties in what's being said, and I miss having the ability to speak in that subtle, maybe playful way that I would in English.
Well, it's a different way of expressing yourself, and I think other people I've spoken to do almost feel like they're a different person when they speak a different language, because it is just, you're speaking through a completely different, web of words almost.
Totally.
So it's interesting.
Yeah, and the root of the meanings of all those words, like long back, is different. Yeah, no, you're right. So, yeah.
Yeah, but it's interesting though, isn't it? Because sometimes expressing yourself in one language isn't the same as the other.
No.
So it depends who you're speaking to in that regard.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But I do really enjoy speaking Welsh, and I enjoy the opportunities when I do get them. I'm like, oh yeah. But then also I sometimes like, oh God, yeah, I've got to speak Welsh to this person. I kind of got to get myself ready for it, because sometimes I feel like it's quite a lot of brain work still.
Well, of course.
Yeah. But I really loved that period of my life. Sort of 5 or 6 years it probably was really, really trying, and you could feel yourself gaining into this world. And it was like the best hobby ever. I try and advocate for it now with people, especially people I work with. Like, we work in community development in Wales, we really need to be learning this language. So
in the Preselis area, how many people speak Welsh here still? What's the
This is like a test. I'm pretty sure that it's in the ward I live in, which is not quite Preselis but just on the outside, it's just over 50%, and that's Clydau ward. So I'm imagining it's not far different in the Preselis area, maybe even slightly higher. But I'm also aware that the Preselis area has attracted a lot of people coming in, and there's been a lot of moving of the population, especially in the last 5 years, maybe more. So I wouldn't like to.
But lots of people are learning the language when they decide to settle here.
Yeah, and in fact I realised someone at choir the other day who lives at Lammas actually is fluent as I am, and her and her husband came in from England and learnt Welsh with their children, because that's what they wanted for their children, to be bilingual, and they recognise that the best way to support that is for them to speak it too. And we were both like, oh, we could speak Welsh together. So, wow. That's great, yeah. But I feel like those people are quite rare. I think people are still very surprised when they realise I can speak Welsh, because it's rare for English-speaking incomers to get to that point where they can
where they can be that fluent that they could have a conversation. Yeah.
And I mean, and I don't know how many, because I know the sense I got was that during COVID, Welsh classes going online. See, for me, that was a massive turn-off, because I was still in a group then. It was more like a conversation group, and I was like, I don't want that.
You wanted that human connection.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But whether, for some people, that maybe opened up opportunities because they didn't have to leave their home, I don't know. I hope it's that. I hope it's the latter.
Some people I know of, that's their only access to doing it, and, they're grateful from it. Are there lots of opportunities to learn Welsh then? Locally?
I don't really know anymore. But the context that I know about how to answer that question is, for us as a staff team, so we're about 13, 14 of us now, with 2 fluent speakers and 3 fluent speakers and a couple of quite progressed learners, and the rest like almost with 0 words. Their sense, those who want to learn, like the options aren't very varied. It's like 2 hours a week in an evening class. That's kind of all you get. So we're actually looking at trying to design some bespoke lessons for our staff to be like a bit more real. But I think the options for speaking Welsh are many, which is different from learning. Although, they go hand in hand. So
I suppose people learn in different ways as well, and it depends on what group works for them.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, for me, very early in my learning, I knew who in my community spoke Welsh, which is most people living in the very agricultural area in Clydai. So I just tried it out. I think I was braver then than I am now. I remember asking someone I was meaning to ask how their leg was, and I asked them how their woods were, but it was close. So I just tried it, and so I think it doesn't take much if you're brave enough to use it.
So people are generally supportive to try and use the Welsh.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I've only ever had one negative response from a drunk person, and I was a security guard. So there's a whole other relationship going on there anyway. And then otherwise, everybody's like, oh. I think the hardest thing is that transition of, I found myself like having to keep speaking Welsh, knowing the other person can speak Welsh English. And they're speaking English to me because, and again, that's that sort of politeness, not wanting to feel uncomfortable with me stumbling or not being understood, and that's probably one of the biggest challenges for us as a community, is to really relax into it and let learners try.
Yes.
Yeah, but create more learners too, like make it as easy as possible for people to learn.
Definitely. Yeah. Great. So we were talking about rivers and water earlier. Actually, we didn't speak about rivers, did we?
I don't think we've mentioned rivers yet.
No, just swimming spots.
Oh yes, that's true. Yeah.
So what are the rivers like in the area? Can you explain to me a little bit about? Because I know you've running projects to do with river health. Can you explain to me a little bit about what you know about some of the local rivers?
So the one I think I kind of had in my history of my life is the Tavy, actually, which I know is not in this region. It's nearby. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that ends in Cardigan. Because I was actually born in Llandyssil area, and there's actually photographs of my mum pregnant with me up to waste in the Tavy. So my folks would go swimming then in the 80s. And interestingly, I've tried to find swimming spots in the Tavy and not had so much success up the sort of the bottom end. They were up the top end. So I suppose I look at a river as a swimming and leisure thing. I've kayaked down the Tavy and I loved that sort of pace of getting deep into a nature corridor that you just don't get to see unless you're on the water. It's quite remarkable, the peace of it. And I had a boyfriend for a while who lived right on the eastern Cleddau, and there was an amazing couple of swimming spots there and walks along the edge. And as that opens out into the haven, isn't it, eventually, sort of really appreciating how different a view of nature a river is. And then more recently through work, then having some kind of relationship with the Nyfer, or the River Nevin, which actually originates really close to where I live on the Frenny Fawr, which again, understanding it in a whole catchment context has been really interesting to me. Of course, a river has a source. You might look at a map and not know that little tiny spring up on the Frenny Fawr is anything to do with the Never, which I know comes out in this beautiful coastal town of Newport. But actually, you suddenly realise everything that pays into that, and the water that pays into that, the land that's related to it. It's I've come to see rivers as a thread that holds so much together, and especially in terms of protecting biodiversity. And that's river health is a major problem actually.
It's become more of a prominent concern with communities at present, hasn't it?
It seems to be, and I think when we started this project 2.5, maybe even almost 3 years ago, which was a citizen science activity, really encouraging people to sample along the whole catchment, and just look at the nitrate and phosphate levels, and then observe what's on the banks and what might be going on the land associated with it. It was in this context of it being in the news all the time, and then even more and more the volume seems to have been turned up on the concern around river health. People are realising that they're not in good condition, and they're a real litmus test for so much else in the environment. It's been, but it also, for me, when I think about this, it's this very delicate balance, because whilst I might have a relationship with a river which is about swimming and kayaking, someone else might see it as a place that they need for work, or they might not even see it, or it's part of their land, and they have a responsibility, and there's a real delicacy around sense of responsibility and ownership over something like a river, that we've had to be very delicate with when we're having conversations about something like the health of it. Especially when there's new regulations around pollution for landowners, that is causing quite a lot of consternation, I think, that landowners feel blamed in a way that it's just obviously the communication has been terrible with this new regulation. And we're sometimes, as people working in the environmental sector, seen as that voice of blame, which we're really trying not to be. So it's rivers are a source of some challenging conversations as much as they are of beauty and peace. And
So in terms of the landscape itself, in your time here, do you think it's changed a lot in terms of maybe the way it's managed or farmed? Have you seen big changes in your time here?
The first thing that comes to mind when you ask that question is I remember seeing hares really every year, and several of them at once, in the fields around where I live, and I have not seen a hare for a very long time. And when I think about why that might be, I think actually the way that land is being managed now is far more intensive. It's being ploughed much more. There's just hardly any permanent pasture around my area, and I can transfer that to this more upland farming practices. Okay, so we've got the uplands that are not being touched so much because they're harder to be, or they're protected, but the peripheral land around it is exceedingly luminous green and monocultural sort of ryegrass and white clover. And yeah, hedgerows have definitely either disappeared or been cut to the nub. I feel I've observed that for sure. Yeah. I mean, and actually, sorry, while you pause, there is that thing that's just happened just up here, just lately, that I know you know, where a piece of beautiful moorland has just been levelled to presumably either be ploughed or killed and resown as for grazing, and that seems like a real punch in the guts, I think, when you know those little patches of biodiversity are getting rarer and more isolated, that is still happening despite the conversation being like I say, the volume being up higher now on the conversation around protecting nature. That's like, God, it must be desperation that causes that kind of behaviour, to do something like trash all that heather and gorse and that diversity.
And some sort of disconnection to that, to nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And that whoever's done that must really need to be making an income or be seen to be being tidy, whatever it might be, whether it's, economic need or a social need. There's something really powerful that's blocking, like you say, that connection to nature. And that's pretty troubling, that kind of thing. And it's happening regularly.
So how much do you know about, say, the plants and animals that live in the Preselis? Do you feel like you know a little bit to share?
You know what, I know a lot more now than I did 3 years ago, having supported and helped run a project, the Growing Better Connections project through CUPHAT, that was about connection with nature and connection within communities. So yeah, having attended things like grassland management training and just sat down with some books and flow charts to help me identify what the grasses might be, or what the flowering plants, the herbs might be. I feel like I have a different internal voice now when I go for a walk, where I'm going, oh look, there's some I don't know, tormentil. Oh look, there's lady's bedspraw. Oh, I know the name of that.
So and you're able to identify them.
Yeah, and then I when I've grown up, my parents are gardeners, and they know a lot about plant life. So I suppose that's part of my identity and my upbringing anyway. But I've definitely learned a lot more about wild plants, I think. And my best friend is actually an ecologist, and she's not based around here, but she comes here often, and we'll go walking, and she came to have a look at the land my parents bought and got really excited. She gets very excited anyway about anything. She's jumping in hedges all the time. So it's great to have people around me who can help me start to identify things. And I certainly, even just a few more bird species I'm familiar with now, and get quite excited when I can identify them and get to see them regularly. And I actually own my own little bit of land now, which you get a really intimate relationship with the land, and it's a little patch of wildness really amongst this monocultural agricultural area that I live in, and that's great. So that's really lovely. I've got to know the animals that live, not like they're my mates, but
you're familiar with what lives where and what grows where.
And when I could expect to see things flowering or visiting and eating whatever they're eating in the trees. And
well, it's that seasonal connection to a piece of land as well, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I was just chatting to someone today who lives up here on the hills, and she was describing some of the things that she sees on Royal Cumcairwen. I was like, oh yeah, I've seen that there too, like the cotton grass. I don't know what it's called either. And just really lovely. And we were supposed to be talking about something to do with work, and she's like, oh sorry. I was like, you know what, actually don't be sorry, because it's so nice that we can share this connection of appreciating this landscape. That's a really special thing. We can all see these things and appreciate them, and that's sharing something, whatever else you might not have in common.
Do you feel that enough people in the area are able to do that or can do that?
I'd say always no. the more we know and understand about species that are here, the more we can appreciate how to protect them and notice when they're going, which is like, actually, it's so easy to look the other way if you don't know what's here and what's disappearing. So yeah, I think there's a lot more that could be done, I suppose. Or
is it difficult to engage people in those conversations locally?
I think that again, sort of being part of my professional life, I think there are ways to do it and then there are ways not to do it. And for us in our organisation, I think we found the most engaging way is when you're really empowering people to think about the solutions, because it's a wonderful thing to learn all the names of these plants, and then you inevitably have to have the conversation about the fact that, well, this piece of permanent pasture is really rare. It's a really bad problem, frightening, scary climate change conversation. But if you're then going, hey, but you can do this at home, you can do that in your school, you can do that with your family's land, that's been a really powerful kind of transformation. And I think connecting people to each other as well, so those who don't have land to those who do, who are willing to share it or the knowledge about it, that's felt like a really powerful way of doing it. But just being like, awareness raising is definitely not enough. That's just not enough. You can't sensitize people and then say, right, you know that now, see you later. It's got to be solutions based and network based for people to feel like, okay, I'm not just gonna be frightened or worried or disempowered. I can do something.
So going back to some of the plants and animals and species here, are there certain sort of rare species in the Preselis that you know about?
I know of as soon as you ask me this, I'm like, my mind goes blank. There's a butterfly. It might be the marsh fritillary, is it? Tell me, Sophie. There is a fritillary around here. Yeah, that I think lives off scabious flowers, I think, and this is one of its few strongholds. I'm going to say the UK, but it might even be Europe. Yes, so I know that the Preselis is special for that, and then I think there's a damselfly as well. Southern, thanks. I can't say I've ever met one, but I appreciate that they're
obviously very rare.
Yeah, that's why. But there are obviously special habitats in the Preselis that help these populations of these damselflies and these fritillaries remain.
How much do you know about the work of the National Park in that conservation of the hills themselves? How much do they do? My contact with the parks has been, we've had quite a lot of contact with them, and I know that they're doing a lot of work with the landowners who around the park and who use the common and they're calling it conserving the park, and I know that they're looking at trying to increase biodiversity and help landowners manage their land in a way that, for example, gets rid of some invasive species, improves fencing so that you can manage grazing in a way that doesn't trash good habitats and sort of keeps grazing animals where they ideally need to be. So yeah, I think it's pretty awesome that we have that. I'm also aware of the other voices that come in around, but this is a very farmed, the Preselis are very farmed, they are grazed heavily by sheep and ponies to some extent as well. And I know there's a conversation about how they could be much more diverse. So yes, protect the special bits of habitat. Yes, protect farming, but also there's so many more opportunities. I know that must be a difficult range of voices for the national park to be managing, because then of course there's tourism and there's leisure and there's all the things that people want access to these places, and they want freedom to roam and they want to see it looks beautiful. Is it going to look less beautiful if it's different? I think that must be a very challenging space for them to work in. But yeah, so I admire their efforts, and they've been very supportive to our project, and just
being an enabler really, being open to conversation support. They've supported some of our hedge planting work with volunteers, and they're clearly doing a lot of amazing work.
Yeah. So what sort of conservation projects, you mentioned some of them, but what are the main ones that Cwmarian are involved with implementing in the area at the moment?
So our big flagship project, Growing Better Connections, has just come to an end, just in March, so just a few months ago. The sort of most recent one that happened towards the end of that period was improving the connectivity between Canol Woods, which is a protected site, and Pengelly Woods, also a protected woodland site. I think they're special areas of conservation, actually, or part of a...
I think they're Preselis.
They're protected for various reasons, barber-style bats and
lichens,
yes,
all of it.
those things. So we worked with a series of landowners who own the land between those two sites to protect the bits of woodland that they're up against their land, and also improve and even install hedgerows to just bolster that wildlife corridor between those two sites. So that was a big piece of work that happened mainly, the actual implementation of it happened over the sort of winter time just gone, and then there was probably about 6 to 8 months of work before that, just trying to work out what people were prepared to do on their land, because it represent changes. You need a few metres of your land to give over for a hedgerow. So that was that, and that was really the biggest piece of work. But we did of that sort. We did smaller versions of that in lots of different places around North Pembrokeshire. The first one, in fact, I visited it today, was connecting a really amazing, unusual oak woodland on the Frenny Fawr, which isn't quite the Preselis, but almost.
I would say
it's an upland bit of the area, isn't it? You can see the Preselis from there. And then there's some forestry on the other side of that hill. So we supported the landowner to not only fence it and plant a hedge along it, but also open it up as a permissive footpath, so that it increased access to this really unusual and quite, I think, unrecognised bit of oak woodland, which are these like little dwarf oak trees that it feels like being in you feel like a giant in this amazing little landscape.
So they're old, but they've grown that way due to the nature of their environment.
That's what we think, but actually it's really hard to say. And we did ask loads of local people, those that we knew had lived there and their parents had lived there, and people were like, I think I remember it being there, but because it's not terribly accessible, and it almost, you can't really tell it's a woodland from the road because it's so weirdly dwarfy. I mean, there's not many that are over my height, and then there's loads that are like a knee height. So we actually worked with a PhD student from Aberystwyth University to do DNA tests on the trees. So that was another citizen science project. We did leaf collection, and we're actually still waiting for the analysis to be done, because she was trying to determine whether it was their DNA that was determining their habit, or whether it was more to do with the climate, or whether it was a bit of both. So are they actually a different sort of oak tree from the ones we see, or are they just being bashed by the western winds or whatever? So again, really interesting, informative bit of work. And just going up there today and remembering that we did that, and how many more people we see walking along that bit of the land now, and having access to that special bit of
connecting
woodland.
with nature then.
Totally, and it really is a magical little spot. It's like you suddenly come upon it like, wow, what is this weird place? It's a beautiful spot.
Great. So we've kind of touched a little bit on farming, agriculture. How much do you know about agriculture in this area? What are the main types of agriculture? You work with farmers a lot in your work. What are the main sorts of farming that they do?
Grass farming. So there's a lot of sheep actually in this area, but there are a lot of cattle as well. So there's several dairies in spitting distance really, and the beef cattle as well. But yeah, I say grass farming sort of tongue in cheek, but that does feel like a lot of what's going on is growing for silage. Because massive herds and that being a ready source of feed for the cows.
Are there more farmers trying to farm more sustainably, regeneratively in the area?
I don't know if there's more now than there were 10 or 20 years ago, because I haven't really got a baseline, but I do feel like there are people coming in. So there are people coming in who are buying maybe small holdings or small farms.
So new farmers.
Yeah, and I think they're really, really motivated to farm regeneratively on a small family scale, one family scale. And we had a lot of people coming to us when we were out there doing Growing Better Connections work saying, please can you help us to do this well? What can we do? Please come and just tell us what to do. So there's a lot of people with that desire, but maybe not the knowledge.
Yeah.
But it's great. Let's hope that their desire turns into something really positive. And I know there are quite a lot of small businesses that have started based on meat production, milk production, and animal and products of the land. I think there's a lot more veg growers, small scale veg growers. I feel like that's definitely grown in the last few years. I know of loads of different places I can get my veg now, which is great. And I do feel that the folk who have been here for many generations, and especially the younger generation who are maybe now taking over the farms, have definitely got their ears pricked up to what's coming. The conversation's been around for a long time. Subsidies are changing. The pressure is really on.
So they know they're going to have to change their practices.
Yes. Although, I suppose those who are reliant on subsidy are going to have to if they want to continue getting subsidy, because it's going to be attached to environmental action, isn't it? But those who aren't reliant on it, I don't know what will happen to that sector of farming, because how are they being supported to consider the impact of what they're doing on biodiversity? I don't know. But and in fact that piece of work that we were involved in, narrating rural change, listening to those focus groups that you convened was so informative. Like that's like the most interesting ear I've had to farm conversations within farming communities, and it was that younger group that felt positive. They felt really positive about it. They were sort of sad that things have gone very divided, and like farms don't share tools anymore, and they're not as together as they were as a community of farmers. And actually there was a sense that could come back, and that they were up for making those changes happen, that they saw the benefits of it economically and environmentally. So I feel quite...
And they weren't phased about making the change then.
Good point, actually. I think you're right, that it's easy to say that people don't like change, and especially farmers, but I feel like those with the youth and the vigour to be ambitious can see that's absolutely the logical way to go. So I'm quite reassured, despite what I was saying earlier about feeling...
Trying to remain optimistic.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? There's a lot to be hopeful about, even when you still see things that like you wish weren't happening. I'm hoping that those are going to become the exception as opposed to the rule. That said, I also know of a few small businesses like Mountain Hall that have really struggled to make a living with the other pressures of life and the pressures of the market. They were trying to sell milk and meat, and have just not going to be able to carry on doing that.
It's very sad, isn't it?
It's really sad, because they seem so progressive and such a great business model, but they just didn't have the support. For whatever reason, they haven't been able to make a living.
Is there support then for agriculture locally? Do local people want to support local businesses and local produce? I think that we've got a big hill to climb to overcome the power of supermarkets. They are still so cheap, apparently,
you know, that's the perception, isn't it? It's still so convenient. You can get it all under one roof. I know farmers who drive to Carmarthen to go to the big Tesco's to get their week's shopping, and they wouldn't even consider going to Shop Carla or Boyd Bede or Ken Davis even, the butchers, you know, in the health food shop.
So those habits are still very strong.
Very much so, yeah. So I because one of our projects works with food and sort of food awareness and just eating together and the joy of that, but also like, this is organic, this is local, these produce come from these people, and that sort of, people aren't so interested. Some people just aren't really interested in that. So I think we've got a long way to go before that habit changes to being more supportive of local producers. And it really is, like, food habits are so hard to break, like deeply psychologically habitual. Which is, I mean, and this is an amazing place. Like, I feel like great. Like it's just saying, Shop Carla, amazing meat just up the road. And then she's also celebrating so many different local producers. She's like making that huge effort to make that shop amazing with all these different local products. And Boyd Bede also amazing. And these are all, you know, these aren't incomers going, look, we're hipster. These are like families that have been here for generations.
Businesses, aren't they?
Yeah, totally. They've been doing it for a long time. So they've obviously found their niche, but I do still think it's a bit niche.
Yes, there's not enough people that are perhaps in that habit of shopping there.
No. And I think, interestingly, vegetables are a real one, because having said there's more vegetable producers, I'm like, good luck, guys. People aren't prepared to pay very much for vegetables. It's a hard way to make a living, and it's hard to find, really. It was until recently hard to find. If you can buy it from the farm gate now if you know the producer, I think. But even somewhere like Boyd Bede, the really well stocked whole food shop, I think they struggle to get their veg out the door whilst it's still fresh, because it's clearly not what people are really going to buy there, because they're getting that plastic wrap stuff in Tesco's.
It's a challenge.
It's a big challenge, because that's where all the environmental issues really sort of stem from, aren't they, the food industry.
So talking about challenges, what do you think the main challenges for this area are going into the future?
The first thing that comes to mind, I think, is culturally, Pembrokeshire is becoming super trendy as a place to come on holiday. It's gorgeous. It was still quite cheap to buy property here until a few years ago. Carmarthenshire next on the list, isn't it? So I think there's that real danger of empty houses, because people are buying second homes and holiday homes, and secondarily people coming in who close the door and put their telly on and don't integrate. I mean, I know people who interestingly were involved in care, but they feel really alienated by Welsh speakers. Like, come on, you just learn some Welsh. There's a real kind of there's a sense of hostility and defensiveness, I think, and I think that's not uncommon. No. So I think that's a big concern for this area, particularly now.
There's creating divisiveness.
Yeah, and interestingly, although I haven't felt it very strongly, just the last, I think since COVID, that sort of bit of, there was sort of a bit of hostility there anyway about different interpretations of the regulation, and then there was a lot more incomers because people started coming on holiday in Britain, and Pembrokeshire was one of the hot spots. And even I felt like some people being quite defensive about Welshness and incomers, and you wouldn't understand. There's been a bit more of that in recent years.
Interesting.
Yeah, which is like, this is really not going to help.
No.
You know, we need to, and one of my passions is community venues, to support them to be vibrant places for everybody, because that's when you start breaking down the barriers and you know, encouraging everyone to be together. When
you haven't mentioned a studio.
Oh no, or the studio. No, I haven't mentioned a studio. Or the Helping Halls project. That's sort of half there. So I mean, that's for me, that's one of the solutions to this problem is you know, really vibrant community centres where people can be together regardless of who they are, whether they've just moved in or whether on holiday or whether they've lived here for many generations. Like, come together. That's where you realise we're all human. That's where you all get excited about the cotton grass, because everybody's seen it.
Well, it's that local connection to each other and the surroundings, isn't it?
and or what's just going on, whether it's because you just all really like lasagna and folk music, whatever it is.
Yeah, whatever your commonality is.
These it's under these sorts of roofs that kind of thing can happen. And but they're difficult to keep running when you've got massive gaps in the communities. I mean, schools are going to be the same, smaller schools are going to be the same, small businesses are going to be the same. I think there's a real threat to not just the cultural heritage, but the sort of socio-economic kind of strength of these communities if there's just people don't live here.
Well, some of the areas in the Preselis are very rural, aren't they? And some of them centre around small primary schools.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Cwmgwaun, the school in the Gwaun Valley, I'm remembering that piece in the Can y Ffordd Eiraidd radio ballad where they were talking to the kids and talking to the teacher and how important it is to those families and to that area for that school to be the advocate and the kind of home of the special culture of that particular area.
Interesting. Great. Is there anything else that I haven't asked that you'd like to mention about your connection to this place or anything notable?
Just a little thing. It was interesting. Talking to my mum yesterday, because my parents have moved into this community, having lived all 14 miles away.
All very far.
I know. And they really, in the first few months, were like, they felt like they were being treated like another lot of incomers, a little bit like, well, you wouldn't understand sort of that. They actually had that for a couple of people, like, you wouldn't understand about farming. And they had to say, well, actually, hey, for one, we've lived here for over 20 years, and B, we are farmers. That's what we've done. That's what my dad did and his dad before him. So there's a real, you do have to make an effort to be accepted. And then, I mean, what I'm amazed at what they've done is they've started, finally, they like volunteering in the community. Even my dad is actually put his hand up to give some time, which is, and they've gone, this is what we want to do. This is a really lovely place to be, and those people who may have kind of doubted them in the first place are now like, all right, mate, on the road. So I think there's a lot to be said of making an effort to become part of what is incredibly rich culture and community to be part of here, and I think that I get a lot out of that because it's my work, but it's also my life. It's like it's all the threads, and it's great to go for a swim in rosebush quarry and go, oh hi, how are you doing? I didn't know you came here. That's great, and that's only after living here for 13 years. I can imagine how wonderful that feels. Or sometimes not so wonderful when you
when you know everybody.
Yeah, no, absolutely everybody, and they know everything about you.
Can't do anything.
No,
secret.
that's fine.
Well, great. Thank you ever so much, Holly. We've had a great conversation.
No worries.
Really enjoyed it.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch.